I think this is hysteria.
It is. I agree with it.
Here's people are saying if you use Photoshop to create something, Photoshop claims ownership of it, or Adobe. But if you use Photoshop to create comics for DC Comics, you're telling me Photoshop thinks they're going to claim ownership over a DC Warner property? It makes no sense. There's no logic to this.
And I'm suggesting to people, if either, because not everybody's comfortable with doing this, but I'm suggesting don't allow your art to be the commodity.
Right. That's a great way
make the artist, like if someone says, I own a Shepard Fairey print, nobody goes, which one? They just go, awesome. It's Shepard Fairey, it's Warhol, it's all that. Be bigger than that. And that doesn't mean you have to be a loudmouth like me, or that you have to do a podcast, but do something so that it's like James Jean. Like James Jean is at a point where it doesn't matter what you got a James Jean. Right.
Yeah.
And so
absolutely.
That comes with time and prestige and a lot of other factors. But the other side of that is, why don't you just be the people's champion? Like, be in front of them and say, hey, I do this because I love it, and I'm so grateful that you love it too, and that we get to share this. These are my goals. This life is hard, like yours, and if you want to learn more about it, I'm going to talk about it all the time, because as a kid, I would have killed to watch a Frank Miller podcast, to watch a Todd McFarlane podcast. Come on, dude.
This is the Inkpulp podcast.
So that's our elevator music intro. Welcome to the Inkpulp podcast with Mattteo the Dumb Shark Scalera and me.
Hello, guys.
What's up, Mattteo? And our special guest today, Attack Peter.
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for coming on. We were talking off camera a little bit, and you weren't sure if you'd be a good fit on the show, but let me explain why I asked you on. I met you years ago at SuperCon
in Miami.
And and you had this amazing booth of, they're all linoleum prints, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the linoleum block prints, yeah.
Yeah, and they were, they're beautiful prints, but here I am at a Comic-Con, and I had never seen anyone doing, making cool nerd shit with linoleum block prints. And I remember I immediately wanted to know, how are you doing this? How you build a career on this. And since then, you have just taken off. So the reason I think you're a good fit for the show is we talk about building your own lane and owning your art as a business. And you have come in as just this total outsider vision and made an entire industry for yourself. And that's very impressive. So I'd love to talk about
now.
that.
I feel like I'm a great guest since you put it that way. So
hey,
you're all welcome. No, I'm just kidding. You know what's funny? Right off the bat, I usually end up saying something like this at the end of conversations, but I want to say it early on because I think it is the key to all of it. Is that last year, working at Mondo, who's owned by Funko, we had a horrible riff where there was a major layoffs, which happens all the time in corporate America. I'm learning, which is horrific. I was a teacher for 13 years, so this is all new to me. Mm-hmm. And some of the founders of the company were let go, and people who I love dearly, and it was a very emotional time. A lot of people spouting off on the internet. And then I started catching flack for being one of the people who stayed behind, and so I started talking to some friends of mine who are in the business, and I'm like, dude, am I an asshole? And I don't know it. I've never caught flack before. I've never had enemies before. And suddenly people are saying all this shit about me that don't even know me. And he goes, no, I think it's just because you advocate for yourself. And that's an uncommon thing in our business. And I'm like, really? That is also news to me. I did not realize that you could survive in this industry without advocating for yourself. And my background is I was in indie garage bands. I got myself signed to a record deal at 19 years old. I was always in street team promotions because you said, Shawn, I'm outside of everything. I lived in Miami my whole life. There's no connections to entertainment industry. I always wanted to be a part of this somehow. And I didn't know how I was going to figure it out. So it's always been a survival technique, right? And it rubs some people the wrong way for sure, apparently. But that's the only way I've ever been able to get this to work.
I think if it rubs people the wrong way, it's more about them and not about you. I think
Certainly,
what you did and
Totally
what
agree
you're
with that.
doing is absolutely the way to do it. It is necessary. But wait, I want to ask. So you had you were signed to a record label?
Yeah, I was in a band. I was in a horrifically. I was in a horrific band when I was in, but it was good for being 15 years old. During like we all wanted to be, Korn and Deftones and all those bands. And then I got into a more professional sounding band at 19. And I used to, just so you can, like this, I think sums me up in a nutshell. I used to take our demos and I would arrive at a concert like 8 hours early before the doors open. Because I used to see I loved going to concerts as a kid. My mom and my stepdad would take me all the time. And I would notice that the bands get there super early. They do a sound check, all that. And then sometimes they're hanging around. And so I'm like, huh. So I met over the years as being a kid and a fan of music. I met everybody by just showing up early to concerts. Like it was so cool. I had nothing to say, nothing to do. I was an annoying 15-year-old kid, but I met everybody, dude. And so then when I got into a band that had like a demo that I was proud of, I used to go to the the concerts 8 hours early and just hang out. Sometimes I would sneak under a tour bus or something like that, like roll under like fucking. I'm dead serious, like Mission Impossible, dude, with like these little burned CDs. I'd be like. And I'd come up on the other side and I would hand every member of the band. And then if they had a backstage pass and they weren't sweaty, I'm like, that's an executive. And so I would give it to those people. And eventually it got into the hands of a producer who played in this band that I doubt anybody will remember, called Snake River Conspiracy. They had like one song that was a cover of the Smiths that did well, but they were managed by Gloria Butler, who is married to Geezer Butler of Black Sabbath.
Oh,
and
shit.
That started this chain effect, a chain reaction of people knowing us, yada, 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 yada. And eventually we landed at Roadrunner Records for like a year before everything collapsed. The pressure of the industry collapsed, a few members of our band, and then it just didn't work out. But it was cool. We were recording in a studio next to Bone Thugs and Harmony and Whitney Houston. It was wild. And it just... The reason I emphasize these things is because I was 19 and I no longer was believing that you couldn't do cool things. Like these things didn't feel far away from me. Like my family is very blue collar. We're teachers and all that kind of stuff. So it felt very distant. And so immediately I'm like, bro, we're not even that good. And we can do this shit. Imagine if we were good,
So I'm curious to know what was your instrument? What do you play in the band?
I play guitar.
Okay.
And I can play bass as well. And I wrote a lot of the music. And back then it was a band called Twice the Sun, which people can look it up on YouTube. It's kind of like it's very amateurish now. But then I was in another band later on recently that I think I'm more proud of, called Phantom Drive, and that was just for fun. But we got good recordings out of it. So if anybody wants to hear me play music, that's where you can find it.
Hell yeah.
The genre is what you were describing earlier, like
the
new metal.
No, it was more. Yeah, but it was more like on the Incubus side of things, like a little lighter. It wasn't as heavy at that point,
Gotcha.
So where did the hustler in you come from, Peter? Because I mean, you're telling me that the hustle from your art came from your music, but you had it then too.
Yeah, I think I grew up as a fat kid, and
okay, now I'm curious to hear the connection between growing up a fat kid and becoming a hustler.
I was a big fat kid, and I had tons of anxiety as a little kid. I didn't realize it was anxiety because I just always had it, and like. I could say like almost every other day at school, I had like a stomach. I had to run to the bathroom from some kind of anxiety or something. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think back then I always felt like I was trying
really
to
important
prove
question.
to
Sorry to interrupt, Peter.
Yeah.
So
number
you said
2 is
because
the
of
answer.
anxiety. Okay. I like how you immediately understood me.
Look, we are one, Mattteo. We are one. But the funny thing is that I always felt like I was trying to get involved with the arts somehow, music. I loved drawing as a kid. I drew all the time. I loved toys beyond the toy age. Like I realized there was a point where all my friends stopped collecting Ninja Turtles and I was still fascinated by Spawn toys, for example, and I couldn't articulate that. Like my biological dad used to mock that regularly. Like, said, at some point you need to stop with this. And then he would use homophobic slur, this
wow.
F shit. Yeah.
Wow.
And
wait, your dad said that to
my
you?
biological dad, my stepdad who raised me was the best. He came in, he was an artist from Cuba. And he's like, do everything here. Meet all my friends who are artists. You're going to be fine.
I want to hear about that Cuban stuff, but let me get back to your dad. So that must have been pretty devastating.
It was, but I didn't know. I also had great grandparents. My mom was awesome. So it was balanced, but it did hurt. And I think I was always motivated with a chip on I'm actually grateful for it because I think I always had a chip on my shoulder to say like, let me show you that I'm going to do this. And I'm also a very stubborn person. I get bored easily. I don't like doing anything that I'm bored with. I get bored of what I do. Like I'm like, as soon as I get good at the block prints and people like it, I'm like, what else? You know what I mean? And
gotcha.
I was going to say just making a block print, if you get bored easily, doesn't sound like a good way to go.
No, like I want to achieve something, but once I feel that I've achieved it internally, I don't need to do it anymore is how my brain works. My brain is always like 5 years ahead of where I'm at. And so I'm like, I need to, you know what I mean? I just keep moving and keep fresh, or else I just feel everything very still. I have friends and peers who end up getting much better at what they do than I ever will because they are just on it all the time. Yeah. And I'm like, next, I gotta do something else.
Yeah, I understand that way of doing. I have it too. Once I realized that what I'm doing is becoming a kind of formula, so I perfectly know how to handle it.
I think
it's not interesting for me anymore. Like I can do it if people like it for a second, but then I gotta move to something else. Otherwise, I feel like a kind of fraud sometimes because it's like, I already know, how to do it. So it's not fair kind of,
Exactly. That's a great analysis of it. And it kind of articulates how I feel. I'm like, am I becoming a hack of myself? Sometimes I think of bands who've been around so long and then they change styles when they come back to the old style, but it's like they're imitating themselves versus being themselves. Right. And that's all in my head. I'm well aware of it. And it's also, if anybody's listening to that, fight that a little bit because we're trying to make a living here. And a lot of that is ego, and just sometimes remembering how hard you tried to get here means you have to be respectful of this world and this business. It's a balance of like finding the new thing that's exciting to you, but also not just being flippant and dismissive of all you've worked for. It's a hard thing.
And to go back to the music again,
we're very brave.
Absolutely, super brave. Going back to the music, one thing that I've never understood were like fans, especially metal, which metal has this thing like people love things to stay the way they are. Like for example, Iron Maiden. Like, okay, you can see that there's differences between albums, but they've been doing more or less the same thing over the last, 35 years or so. So I've never understood fans that started hating a band for trying to change. Like,
I understand it. I'm gonna explain it to you, Matteo. Yeah. Do you have a favorite food, like a fast food?
Like, is there something that's
consistent?
No. Yeah, no. Okay. I don't have it, but I understand what it is. So
okay. Imagine you're going to like, let's say Starbucks, right? And you get the same order every time. And then one time you show up and it tastes a little different. You're like, right? Yeah. But as a consumer, you're like, I wasn't planning on thinking about this. I just want my Starbucks and move on. As a consumer, that's how you feel, right? But if you were a chef and not just some Starbucks part-timer that has no investment in the longevity of the company, if you're a chef, I'm like, I'm going to make the same egg white egg bites again, bro. And so there's a relationship that's disjointed there. So it's like people who work at Starbucks might move on and do other things when they're tired of it, but Starbucks will stay the same. And so I think it's an expectation thing, like it also, I think I've noticed it in
totally.
myself, like with podcasting, for example. It's weird that so many podcasts come up and disappear faster than other forms of entertainment, right? And I noticed that when it goes away, it marks this unexpected shift in time in my brain. And I'm like, oh, I'm getting older, you know, like life's moving on, you know, it's this thing that you don't articulate, but it's just like, you know, and so when it's a band that you grew up in and you have the shirts and the memories of it, there's like a nostalgia thing that I think is like a recurrent nostalgia. Like you're stuck in a time, you're the hero of high school. And if it goes away, then you have to like reflect on things, I think. I guess.
No. If you put it that way, it makes absolute sense. I guess that probably my approach has always been like, on one hand, I was a fan of the band, but on the other hand, I'm an artist myself.
That's the difference.
You know, I used to play music as well. So I like, at the end of the day, I've always appreciated more bands that tried something different every time.
I did not the 90s era, the late 90s era Metallica until I became a professional. That's a true
what
statement.
I wanted to mention.
Yes.
Like Metallica is the one of
I like the new stuff more now.
Best examples. Yeah. Like
I
when
love the new
Sentenger
stuff.
came out, like people were fucking
How about
mad.
Load?
There's people.
Load. They cut their hair.
Yeah.
Load was like people in the streets like
Dude,
you know what I mean?
Death Magnetic was great.
Yeah.
I think they kept. See, I always like. I heard all the hate. I was like, "What are you guys listening to?" Because everything I'm hearing, I enjoy.
There's another aspect too, is that we are as creators more invested in what we're working on, and so when you're hearing music or seeing art, you probably, if you're anything like me, you're just like, "Hey, good on you, man, keeping that shit going." Like it's different. It's different.
Yeah.
That's
Speaking
true.
of that magnetic, like the feeling that I had when I listened to it the first time, I thought for a second, okay, they've done this because people got too pissed at them for changing the style too much. So they're going back to rougher sounds, what they used to do in the past. But this is just my feeling. I'm not,
or they just feel like doing it again.
I don't know.
Anyway, Shawn, you were saying,
or maybe they just felt like doing it. Yeah.
That wraps up the Metallica portion of our conversation.
That's the Metallica podcast.
I'm already imagining like at least 50 comments insulting us. All the
Guys,
Metallica
I came here
fans.
for comics, not Metallica. No, but Peter, you raised a very interesting concept, one that I think was in my head, but not that I really contextualized the way you did, where you're right. We are artists. We're always looking to grow and change and try new things. And then we have the consumers or the fan base, which when they find something they like it, a lot of them seem to want that consistency. So the challenge for us is, how do we continue to grow without losing the audience? And that's something I've been really working on lately, but hearing you say it just really kind of opened up a lot. So what do you think the key to success is when trying to balance those two things?
I think what we're doing right now, honestly, and it's the biggest difference between what happened in the past to now. Like I remember, like my favorite comic artist of all time, it ebbs and flows of who I'm like really feeling at the moment, but consistently and the one that got me to do everything that I do is Mike Mignola and Hellboy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I remember getting into him. I want to say it was like 2002, late, technically. And then going back and seeing the early Hellboy comics and going, whoa, that's a different a rendering of your style. And then going back and finding his all the Marvel and DC work. I'm like, oh, whoa, okay. And then staying on while he went forward, I'm like, whoa, so it's like, I'm so in love with this drawing style that I want to just hold it and like don't you fucking change. It's perfect. But you know what I mean? And so like the difference is that if Mike Mignola had a podcast, and I weaseled my way into having a 2-hour conversation on the phone with him in 2005. I interviewed him and I got to hear him and his brain working. And I think if he was doing what you guys do, what I do, and just talking more to the audience, it would illustrate that for people who aren't considering it, that like, yeah, we're a constantly evolving thing, and there's all these influences, and we're all chasing something. And by the time we put out something that you really love, that's the result of a toiling. That's not like the arrival. It's the result. I'm like, okay, that's usually the end. When you guys start digging something, I'm done with it. You know, and that's a hard thing sometimes to articulate, but just doing this is the secret, and just explaining that to people. You know, I that's been the hardest thing in my short-lived career so far, is explaining how I'm going to continue being the artist and work behind the scenes on things. You know, like a lot of people are like, how those two don't mesh. And it's gotten me to pay close attention to Jim Lee now more than ever. I'm like, how does he do it? Because that guy just this morning posted another banger, and I'm like, bro, like, how do you do it? Because that's where I'm looking at. I want to be that guy, you know? Yeah. But yeah, just being transparent, I think, is it.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is with social media, with podcasting, with everything we're doing, we are able to tell our stories as artists, not the fictional stories we draw, but our personal stories. So if we, and I think people enjoy like, oh, this is a journey, let me get on board. Cause I've started really playing around with this loose, sketchy, chaotic drawing style. And I finally did a post on it like this past weekend, and it went apeshit. But I've been talking about trying new things for the past couple of years. So I think it was just, on this show, on social media, on all kinds of stuff. So I feel like when it happened, everyone was like, I love what you do, but I love this too. And it was just like all love. And
well,
so
you also, by doing that, you also solve the threat of AI for artists, in my opinion. You know what I mean? So now,
well, that's another thing. Yeah.
You shifted the emphasis from the art, right, to the artist. And I think if you gave anybody the choice to own one of your pieces, or get to spend time in your studio and watch you work, or get to have a conversation about your art with you, I feel like the majority of people who really love this stuff would choose the personal interaction, because that's more rare, right? If you're a collector, you're always after the rare thing. I have bought and sold artwork that meant a lot to me. I have all this, but my memories of talking to certain creators along the way that just shifted my perspective on everything. I think about Scott Morse all the time. Like, that's somebody who set me on my path 20 years ago.
How did you meet him, or was it just his work?
I Comic-Con. I went to San Diego Comic-Con not knowing what San Diego Comic-Con was in 2002. Remember, pre-YouTube, and I walked in and I'm like, that was like my first convention ever.
Okay.
Like I'm like, what the? And so I went directly to meet Mike Mignola, who I bought an original Mignola illustration with all the money I had for the whole weekend. And it was like $500 at the time, and which is a steal now.
Much more now. Yeah, it's worth so much more.
And he was very like, hey, thank you so much. And I was just still like, I wanted to like say something, I was Chris Farley and John Lennon and Paul McCartney,
Then you had to run to the bathroom for
right? Probably for sure.
Callback, great callback, Mattteo. Great callback.
100%. It always plays a role. I shouldn't have had that milk, and so like with breakfast, but like I could tell he's like, all right, go on, move, and so Scott Morse was set up near him in that part of Comic-Con, and I had seen Magic Pickle in a comic shop, but it didn't connect that he would be here, and I just stumbled upon like, holy shit, and he's doing commissions.
Yeah.
And if you don't know Scott Morse's art, it's criminally underrated. I think every artist who's in this business knows and loves him.
Brilliant. Yeah, he's brilliant.
People don't get it, man. And so he used to do these $100 commissions where you would just tell him what you wanted, and he would like just paint it on the spot there, painted with cell vinyl paint.
Yes.
Animation
oh my
paint.
God. I remember watching him paint with that cell vinyl stuff. Beautiful paintings.
So on one hand, it's like to put your balls on the table and go, what do you want? Let's go. And the other hand, it's like fully painted. It's not even, it's like Sumier. He's not even like sketching. It's just like, and then like blow drying, and then boom, 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 boom. There you go. And when you get it, you're like, this is more impressive than anything I could have gotten at the show floor for 3 times the price. And so there was that aspect of the confidence, the ability to just take anything and just do it live while everybody's watching you. That made me always want to have a performative aspect to my artwork if possible. And when I think about the YouTubing that I did during the pandemic and a little bit after, I'm like, that's where that comes from. Like, being is loving that, but also I was a teacher for 13 years. So like having to demo in front of kids, and then now it just feels good. And it feels like you're rewarding somebody who wants to spend their hard-earned money on your artwork with more than just an item. You're giving them an experience, right? So it's those type of things that I think, will always preserve what we do, even in the face of AI, right? Which is the next looming thing. I urge everybody to remember that there was also a panic about Photoshop 20 years ago. And there was also like a scarlet letter.
Speaking
if you
of
use
AI
Photoshop to
and
draw,
Photoshop, have you guys heard the news? Jesus Christ!
Yeah, but here's the thing. I think this is hysteria.
It is.
Everyone's
I agree with
freaking. Here's people are saying if you use Photoshop to create something, Photoshop claims ownership of it, or Adobe. But if you use Photoshop to create comics for DC Comics, you're telling me Photoshop thinks they're going to claim ownership over a DC Warner property? It makes no sense. There's no logic to this.
And I'm suggesting to people, because not everybody's comfortable with doing this, but I'm suggesting don't allow your art to be the commodity.
Right. That's a great way to see.
Make the artist, like if someone says, I own a Shepard Fairey print, nobody goes, which one? They just go, awesome. It's Shepard Fairey, it's Warhol, it's all that. Be bigger than that. And that doesn't mean you have to like be a loudmouth like me, or that you have to do a podcast, but do something so that it's like James Jean. Like James Jean is at a point where it doesn't matter what you got a James Jean. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
absolutely.
That comes with time and prestige and a lot of other factors. But the other side of that is, why don't you just be the people's champion? Like be in front of them and say, hey, I do this because I love it. And I'm so grateful that you love it too. And that we get to share this. These are my goals. This life is hard like yours. And if you want to learn more about it, I'm going to talk about it all the time. Because as a kid, I would have killed to watch a Frank Miller podcast, to watch a Todd McFarlane podcast. Come on, dude.
Absolutely. Honestly, that's why I started my whole Keep Craft Alive thing. And this Inkpulp is a community. It's
brilliant.
Well, thank you. I'm trying to build. But so, Mattteo, did you have a question? I feel like I interrupted you. Did I?
No. I have a question in store for later, if you like. Okay. If you want, like. Okay. Because we didn't get to the point where Peter explained to us the connection between being fat and becoming a hustler.
Yeah, let's do that now. Do that now. Yeah, do that now.
Yeah. We started talking about Metallica and all that shit.
Okay, so I grew up in Miami, which like it was very like much an athletic everything is about athletics, soccer, baseball, basketball. Everybody's good looking in Miami. That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. That is true.
Yeah. And like, I was like, I was like the fat kid in school always, not, and I think I survived because I was very much interested in girls. I wanted a girlfriend. I wanted to date chicks. I wanted to be liked, by, the girls I liked. And then I realized that my only chance at doing that was being funny and social and talking a lot. So, but I always had to try harder than my friends who were like super good looking kids. And so I think that it comes from that. It was like, who's my friend in the music scene in Miami? Nobody. So how do I get into a band? Like, forget how do I get a show? How do I get into a band? So now I have to get my friends who are remotely interested in music and go, here, I have an extra guitar, or here, play my bass and let's start a band, so it was like, just let's go, let's do something, guys, and then they would usually fall off because they were not as motivated as I was. And so I would just use that experience to leverage it into a slightly better station with slightly better band members, going to shows, learning who the other bands are, seeing if any of them would tolerate me. And, by the time I was like 15, 16 years old, like we were playing shows all over Miami, the beach, Fort Lauderdale. and it wasn't good, but we were playing with bands who got signed to record deals.
Yeah.
And then I would study them. I would try to learn from what they were doing. Anything I could pick up, like in peripheral conversations, acronyms, names of producers locally, whatever I could just glean, in this. And I attribute it all to like feeling like I had to push harder to get at the default starting point as like a outsider, fat kid, loudmouth. So I had to just prove it, and I was very insecure about everything because I had friends who were athletic, right? And their parents were related to big athletic families in Miami. So there's a hookup. Yeah. I had friends, that were into music, and they had family and friends that were already in the School of Music at University of Miami and produced the Gloria Stefan or whatever it is. Everybody had a connection, it felt like. And I had, or at least had an appearance that made them like very desirable to be around. And I had like neither. So I always felt like I had to hustle. It might've been all in my own head, but it pushed me, and it's like a learned behavior. And so now, I love that I work at Mondo because the point of my being there is to find new creators who don't have a platform yet and try to match them up with something and give them a platform and help them like skip a few steps, and I'm lucky that I get to work with my friend Hector Arce there, who feels the same way. And we're always trying to find new artists to design a figure or design a record album, whatever, poster. And it just gives us an opportunity to like, push those people up a little bit. It's the same thing.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
So I want to move forward a little bit. You went from, so you got in the band, you got signed, and it fell apart. Were you drawing
Not
alongside
really.
that? So what caused the transition from music to visual arts?
I got to the point in music where I felt like my favorite thing about music was working together with other people, which is interesting because I find myself always going back to that, which is hard as an artist. It's very isolating. Yeah. But I also, the flip side of it is that you're on the hook. You're basically subject to the whim of 3 to 4 other eccentric personalities. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
And that's great to party. It's great to create, but it's terrible for business. And the reason that band like didn't work out, like we literally had our tickets punched to go record an album in New York in the same place. Speaking of Metallica, we'll bring it back to where they recorded the Black Album. And my singer just decided suddenly that he found God, and God didn't want him to play music. And when you listen to the music, it was not heavy black metal. It's just ridiculous. But good guy. We've made friends since, but it just ripped everything apart. Like, and I had a total it was the first time I had a total like crisis of life. Like what am I? Like identity crisis. Like this guy just took everything from me on a whim.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And how can I reinvest everything I've done again and have someone else pull it from me? So instead, I started to feel the pull of like I had been like tuned out of comics for like my teenage years. Like I was obsessed as a young kid all the way to like high school. And then I got into music, and I just kind of like peripherally paid attention to what McFarlane was doing with Korn and yada, yada. And then, but then I was started to work. My friend started to work at a comic shop, and I started paying attention more. And the Amazing Spider-Man covers by Scott Campbell and the interiors by John Romita Jr. Like, and I discovered those because I saw the Spider-Man movie, and I'm like, what's going on with comics? And I'm like, what is this? And I was hooked by those two things, started going to comic shops again. And I saw a Hellboy t-shirt hanging in a comic shop in Orlando. And I go, what is that? And that sent me down a spiral. And suddenly I go, I had no machinations. I'm like, I just need to try to draw like that and see if I can do it, because it looks so easy to draw like Manola. And famous last words. But it was so alluring. It just like pulled at me. And I was still in a band, but I kept like my attention kept shifting over to just creating on my own and not needing them. And then a couple times I got told by good friends who meant well, they're like, Peter, we've seen your art. It's not that's not your path. Stick to music. You're good at it.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
And
wow.
by the
Holy
way,
shit.
I have been told shit like that my whole life by people who I love dearly. I got told in 2018 by an artist we all know and who I love dearly, and I won't name him because I didn't mean anything bad by this. And I was asking them, hey, should I go to Designer Con? I heard it's like a good show. I've never left Miami before for a convention, but I hear it's good. And he goes, do not go to that show. You are going to suffer and die on a vine. It's a toy show. They're not going to be interested in your artwork. He meant well, like don't spend your money,
sure.
you know?
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
But another artist, Brian Ewing, basically, rest in peace, told me like, I'm an idiot if I don't go to that show, if I can get into it. And it changed my life, that one show.
I was going to say, if there's any show I see you like really shining at, it would be Designer Con.
Well, and so the point is like they were both giving me sincere advice, you know, and it's just like there's all these moments to answer your question that I look back on and I go, that inspired this and that inspired that. And I never know what I'm doing. I'm always scared to death. But I have this drive that I'm like, I just need to try and see. Because if it works out, if it doesn't work out, I can make a joke about it. We can laugh about it. That's good. I'm not going to be like destroyed. But if it works out, you know?
Right.
And so that's what happened. I just started to feel more comfortable relying on myself.
So
And
when
I
you went
felt
to that
lonely.
show, were you doing the linoleum cuts? So what got you into the linoleum cutting?
Teaching. You know, I was a teacher for 13 years teaching art. And I really thought I had no chance of ever having a career as a professional artist, but I was going to just be happy, like sharing my love with, you know, young people. And I taught every age from kindergarten to grad school, University of Miami. And I met a good friend of mine, Brian Reedy, who's also a block print artist from Miami. And we were both doing all kinds of art at the time. Like we were doing everything because we were art teachers, you know? But we started
so
to
you were
notice,
teaching art in general, like from painting, drawing,
everything.
Okay, gotcha. Gotcha.
I was classically trained. So I was actually like for a long time just doing like, you know, realism and oil painting and things like that. And I because I wanted to prove that I could do it, but I wasn't into it, you know? And it didn't fit my lifestyle. I wanted to be Scott Morris. I had all the paints. I wanted to just be up, boom, 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 and do a lot of painting. But my lifestyle as a teacher at the time during the recession was like no classrooms, art on a cart. And so by the time, you know, my strategy was I would teach them a skill that day, like a little technique, something bite-sized and manageable. And I would let them try it for an extended period of time. And then I would walk around and help them out. When I felt like everybody was on a roll, I would work alongside them. And so I would usually do paintings, you know, and then it just became so hard to pick up and tear down paintings with that time I had that I started just doing little block prints, like little 5x7 carvings. And because that was just a Sharpie, the block, and a carving tool. No cleanup, no washing, anything. And so I started doing that. And then I also was able to give kids prints. Like, you know, nice. Like, hey, you did great today. Here's a print. And I loved that aspect of it. And they thought that was gold. And so, you know, it just found a lot of like harmony around it and enjoying it. And it was very sculptural and tactile. And I liked that. And there's a lot of phase shifting. You're drawing for a little while, then you're carving, then you're printing. There's always like your brain is in a different mode. And at the end, you get a tactile object that you can give someone. Like you can give them the actual handmade thing. And I liked all that. And it also made me the means of my own production, right? Because if I was doing paintings, I was selling prints, and it just felt a little removed from the painting. You know, it wasn't like when I did a digital illustration, it looked good as a print. Painting's always a little bit off. And then when I started to go to Comic Cons again, like 2011, I went to my first Miami convention in years, which was SuperCon. It was tiny back then. And me and my buddy Brian, we looked around, we're like, you know, nobody's doing what we do in block prints. Why don't we set up and try? And we shared a table in Artist Alley with everything, block prints, digital art, paintings, pen and ink, everything, you know, no rhyme or reason. Yeah. And the number one sellers were the block prints, boom, every time. And so I started doing more of that over time, little by little. And to the point where that was just all I was doing. And at that point, I started to really understand what it was that was giving me an edge. Number one, like I explained, the tactile thing, the 1-to-1, right? The 1-of-1 every time. But also the prints, if you remember, Shawn, they're like big. They're like 20 by 30, 18 by 24. I mean, so my booth was like a billboard.
Right.
You know?
But your booth also wasn't like, you weren't behind a table. Your booth was like, come on in.
Yes, always.
And I thought that's where I was like, oh, this guy's
that's my marketing brain from working retail as a kid. Like I thought if I put a table, I noticed people would just, and I did tables for a while. People could just walk by. You're literally giving them an excuse to walk by. Like,
right.
You know, it's like this constant flow. Like it's artist alley. It's not my booth.
Yeah.
And so eventually I realized if I move the table, and if I could get a corner, I started investing in the corner booths. I could set it up in a way where me and my wife would stand outside the booth and like, you know, if anybody looked, I would say, I would bring them in, like, come in. And like, and then when they were in there, I would put the carving in their hand. I would put the print in their hand. I say, this is how I do it. This is how it's made. It's different. You are probably not familiar with this, or you remember being in 6th grade, you know, that kind of thing. So I was always trying to, because honestly, dude, like I would look around the convention, I'm like, how the fuck am I going to sell anything when somebody could go and see, you know, dude, the Q*berts were at a convention, you know, I mean, legacies, like, how am I going to stand out? You know what I mean? Like I had Jeff Decal every day at every convention I was doing. That guy was crushing and just going, and I'm like, how do I like that? And so I was always motivated by the local guys, the visiting guys. I have to at least get attention. So that's where that came from. But I strongly recommend it for any artist who can figure out how to make it work. Get the table out of the way. Let people hang out with you. And so if they buy a print, it's more of a souvenir of a great time they had with you versus like another print.
And they're also right. And then they're remembering you more than the piece.
Yours will get framed. The other ones might stay in a bag.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
You know?
So I'm wondering how we could do it,
Mattteo.
Shawn. Do you have ideas on how to do it without a table?
No, you keep the table. You keep the table, but you don't put the table as a barrier in front. So you need to reorganize the booth. Also, if you are doing commissions in person, like schedule that. Like do one commission a day or something, or one part of it a day.
Mattteo, we could. I think we could spend some time before New York figuring something out. It's going to mean we're doing cons differently.
Yeah.
Instead of just doing commissions, we're going to be focused on selling items.
Yeah.
And we'll have some. And like we could, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, selling items by way of bringing people into your world, like the body language. I mean, think of this. I was at Chicago, Art Adams, Ben Templesmith, John Wayshak, you know, Jason Sean Alexander, like killers, fucking killers, right? And I'm walking by their booth and they're like this.
Yeah.
And it looks like beggars on the street. Like it's just the body language is weird, man. And I'm saying like stand up, you know, get some comfy shoes, get yourself. I always used to buy like the $30 Walmart rug at every city I was in and just put it there. So it's like a little nicer looking on the floor, whatever, you know. And then now it's like the best of the people who have these really nice shop booths, but the shit they sell is garbage. And the art from the awesome artists, like combine that. And then you got a killer thing. And if you're doing commissions because you have to, well, I guess you have to. Like that's the way it is.
But Mattteo, we could take turns where like you go sit down and do commissions. I'll man the front, and then we could switch.
It's not as cool as everybody thinks to just have their head down and do commissions. Like it accidentally reads to some people as I don't have time for you. And that's not your intention.
No. I totally agree. Yeah. That's why lately for the last shows that I've been doing, I'm trying to do possibly all the commissions at home, or at least have only one a day.
Or how about
it's a full figure?
How about you take them to 75% and you finish them at a show? You know, like That's that. And then another thing I would do is I would have an iPad at my booth with a loop playing of what I do. You know, you guys know Gian Galang. Gian Galang, he's an artist who he just did a Bloodsport poster for Mondo, and a Shaun of the Dead poster. He does these giant paintings with rollers, and he cuts the figures out and he stacks them and layers them. He's like the favorite artist of all the UFC fighters and all. His stuff's gonna blow you away. But it's so performative that like everything with him is like experiential, like video.
Yeah.
And you're like, what the fuck? It's so good. So just give people that to chew on, because everything you guys do is the dream. Like, to be a professional comic artist, I still say, to me, is the dream. Like, that you got the ink, you got the pencils and the clean Bristol, and you're just, I mean, you got a style that people recognize, you're published. Come on. Like, you got it. You did everything you wanted to do as a kid. Now all you have to do is remove the thing that people used to do to us when we were kids, is the gatekeeping or the unintentional gatekeeping. That's the last thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
If you remove that, now you're not only are you like bringing people in, but you're actually helping the next generation of artists by shifting what this should be. It shouldn't be this thing where like, Wonder Woman got it. Okay, you know, like that energy sucks, dude. Like, you know, it's like it sucks. And so just doing that makes people fans of artists, not just art.
We were noticing that, at least I've been noticing it in a couple of occasions. And we spoke about it, Shawn, if you remember. Like,
in DC, right?
One thing, And not only that, even before that, by talking to Jim Mahfood.
Yeah.
I love him.
Over the last
He's
2
another
years. Yeah, he's been doing is stop doing commission. Maybe it will do commissions before the show.
That's
and
what
then
he does.
he'll be standing all the time by his booth and constantly, luring people in and asking them, hey, do you want to take a look at my book, take a look at this and this and that. And Shawn was mentioning Washington. What I tried to do, since it wasn't, as busy as we expected, when I had time, I would stand up, and whoever stopped by, I would start, giving them information about stuff. And for example, normally we have a offer, which is a print is $20 and 3 prints is 50. So we have a $10 discount. But most of the time, nobody, buys 3 prints. Nobody uses this offer. But what I've noticed is that when I started telling people, they were like, oh, that's cool. Let me grab 3 then.
That's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just because I said it.
But that goes to the beginning of what we were saying, is like, there is still a school of thought, and I'm telling you, and it's intense and it permeates, especially the world that I'm in, that is like doing what you just described is like tacky, gross, and it demeans the art. To me, those people are hurt psychologically and were kept out of the cool kids table in high school, like that's what that is. I don't give a fuck about those people. I never have. I'm not in this business to impress other artists or other critics. I'm in this business because I love making stuff and using the stuff that I made as a ticket to get to do this, to hang out with other people who I love and respect. And the art for me is a ticket in to great conversations, to great experience, to seeing other artists at an intimate level. That's what it is for me. So I don't care about anybody else. Yeah. And in order to keep doing that, I need to make money. So I don't have to go work at Target or go back to doing a job, that's not art. So I am going to proudly figure out ways to be successful and then share it with everybody, because there's not a famine. Like there's everybody can have a piece of the pie, really. And I think you guys, and I always say this, comic artists have it, in my opinion, have the best advantage, because you can point to the reason your art exists immediately. You can relate to people immediately. Like, who's your favorite character? I probably worked on them, right? And then that's an intro. If either of you, like, Shawn, who's your favorite comic artist? You get to pick one right now. All time.
Mattteo Scalera.
Well, that won't work for my example. But
okay, Art Adams. Let's say Art Adams.
Okay. Yeah. So if Art Adams said, if you had a chance to just be at the Art Adams table and like go through his portfolio, that's really cool. Or what if Art Adams said, man, what do you do? Oh, you're an artist. Oh man, let's go get drinks later and talk about what would you rather have?
Yeah, absolutely.
So like, you can't do that with everybody, but you can do more than what we do when we're just doing this at the table, for sure.
So this insight you have Did it come from learning
From being
from
fat,
someone, or
from being a fat kid.
Matteo's right. Matteo's right, because I always felt like I was annoying an artist. I have so much love in my heart for creators. Like to me, once I discovered Image Comics at 10, 11 years old, and I lined up for Spawn, I'm like, rock bands who? Like McFarlane, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld.
Yeah.
These are my guys, dude.
yeah,
You know?
yeah.
And so I always have that in, like, there's a coffee table that existed for a while that's like inside the artist studio. There's just pictures of all the, like, Jeff Darrow and everybody in their studio. And I just like drool over that stuff, you know, like just the life of it.
Yeah.
And so I probably come on too strong as a fan. I'm like, I love this. And so I probably, you know, always felt like, how do I fit into this world? How do I get to have a conversation that's meaningful more than just like, can I buy this? Can I commission you? You know, like I want to like feel a part of this. And so I think that's where this insight came from. Cause I remember there was a lot of artists when I was younger and annoying as fuck, I'm sure, that were like, please. And they gave me that energy. And then there were certain artists like Eric Powell, Zach Howard. There was just certain artists that I met back then that were like, no, Scott Morse. They were like, you know, they would listen to what I had to say as like, I was like 19, 20. They would like, and I don't mean to age anybody, but they're much older than I am. And so they're very old. And so, but they would tell me about their
not
process.
Older than Shawn, right?
Well,
no one's older than me.
Yeah, he's immortal. It's different. Ben Templesmith was very generous with his time when I was super young, and 30 Days just hit peak popularity. He was still like, he would break down things. He was self-effacing. And I became lifelong fans of these guys beyond the artwork, you know?
Also, I mean, I want to take a second here to illustrate to the public the impact these artists had on you and how you remember all of it. I think all the artists that are listening, think about that. You know, think about the impact you can potentially have on a future artist just by taking 5 minutes.
Dude, and I'll go even further, like the impact you can have on someone who's lonely, on somebody who's like bummed out, on somebody who doesn't have like excitement in their life other than being a fan, you know? And so I always think like it's an industry of creating luxury is what we do to a certain extent, even though for us it comes like as a second nature. But, you know, in order for people to buy artwork, it's luxury items, you know? And so how do we make it viable? Well, what's the number one demand? I think now is community and connectedness. And if you can provide that for someone and they can get great art after it, come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
I guess
we do the coolest thing in the world, man. We do the coolest thing in the world.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right.
We do
Mattteo,
the coolest,
go ahead.
and it's so rare. Go ahead, Mattteo.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say you're making me think a lot about this, and it's something that I've been thinking about over the last year. Shawn knows well. We keep talking about how should we approach the show, and yeah, I'm still to me, the conflicting elements are the elements on the other side are one. Over the last, 3-4 years, I haven't been doing a lot of shows. So now I just come overseas a couple of times a year. Mm-hmm. So every time there's and especially for big shows like New York, there's always a lot of people wanting commissions and a lot of people that don't apply for the pre-show list. So they want to, get the commission at the show. So I'm always conflicted because I really want, especially now, because again, I don't do a lot of shows. I don't want, I want to give them, a piece if they want it, because they don't have a lot of chance to see me. And sorry, I'm just
no, go ahead.
And one last thing, another thing that I've noticed is that since I'm not one of those artists that works on I don't bring like a hardboard to work on, right? So I work like flat. And there's another element, which is that people sometimes like watching me working.
100%.
And that I saw, especially if I'm doing a nice piece, pretty technical, that drives a lot of eyes and attention. And then I see that people stay there, and when I finish, they want to buy something. So they might
100%.
not commission me something, but they're gonna, buy a
100%.
book because
100%.
they were, they got mesmerized, watching me work. But
I think
I still, I'm still fighting, inwards, like inside, to understand what's the right balance. Probably
I just think
doing
you make
one
it,
commission.
what you just
then,
what you just described is very special. Not everybody gets to have it. It's the reality. Like if you wanted to really satisfy everybody who wants it, you wouldn't be able to, right? So you can even if your goal is to be generous with your time and all that, there is a limit. And so what I'm physically and so what I'm suggesting is, I mean, you figure out ways to do that, like, so it's special. Like, I'm here 8 hours today. For these 3 hours, I'm going to be doing this, or for these 2 hours. So you should come back. And in fact, at that point, you're really describing like an event, and so I think it pumps it up even more.
I like that. Yeah, like Matteo, if we had it like the booth like open in the mornings and we draw people and we have conversations, we're like, come back at 3, we're going to put the tables out front and we're going to be working and doing demonstrations and shit. That might be cool.
Jason's going to be so happy about this new decision.
I love
it. Jason's our art dealer.
Fuck him.
Yes.
I'll tell you what, though, when it comes to Jason, when I try shit and it works, he's looking to adopt that new stuff into make it better.
What I'm describing hopefully should make the work more valuable, and it would make it so that you get to work smarter, not harder, right? Like you do less work and it's even more valuable because it's connected to the experience. And because your time is limited, there's not as much of it, right? And you can always find ways. Like there's ways to have the good, better, best options for people to buy.
Right. Like we could do.
Peter,
like,
I think we're creating something in this podcast, in this episode specifically. I think that 5 years from now, they're going to be like tableless shows.
Maybe.
I like this idea.
They are getting boring, in my opinion. Like I know I'm somebody who gets bored easily, but I've been to these shows for 2 decades now, and nothing has evolved. And I think it's because there's a religious, dogmatic nature to it, that we remember the feeling of seeing Jim Lee at a table, and my God, it's like a sacrament. And so we want to feel that, but we don't have to be so dogmatic of how it looks and how we present it.
The same thing that people were feeling about hearing Master of Puppets, and then all of a sudden hearing Saint Anger.
It's time to do Saint Anger.
100 expressive people in a hall, and we all decide that the one way to do it is the right way, and we're all going to do it the same way.
Right. That's a good point. Matteo, let's talk over the summer about New York. Let's try some things. But we're getting close to an hour here, and I do want to cover. So Peter, you got to a point where you were just doing shows and making a living off of that.
Well, no, I never stopped teaching.
Well, you don't teach now, right?
No, but I never.
Mondo?
No, I didn't stop teaching until I got hired by Skybound. Actually, Skybound.
That's what it was. Yeah. So I just want to cover that aspect of your career. That led you to being hired by Skybound.
Yeah, I got seen at I actually turned down an offer for a job at Skybound, like a commission job, like to do a gig. I just didn't. I was doing well on my own. I didn't need these outside gigs. Suddenly, I'm like, ooh, I think I'm going to turn somebody down, which is crazy for me. And then I think that like made the prospect of me more tantalizing to their CEO, Dave Albert, who such a good dude. Basically said, I don't care what it is. We need to work with you. Why don't you just work with us? And they hired me to be an artist in residence right before the pandemic. I'm sure the plans were very different, had the pandemic not happened, but essentially I was getting a salary to be an artist at Skybound and work on my own brand, develop a brand. I think Shag is a good, comp, an artist who has a brand associated. Yeah. And then also do other things that Skybound's involved in. So I would do, comic covers for Image, which was amazing. I did a lot of YouTube stuff for them because they used to hire out talent for their digital presentations and things like that. We had nobody knew what they were doing. It was a pandemic. Everybody was flipping out, but it got me to start thinking about streaming because my conventions were gone, and that's how I met people and grew. And so the streams are still up on my YouTube channel. You go to the beginning, they're a shit show. But my wife and I just taught ourselves how to stream with some of the help of people at Skybound, and we started doing it, and that's what really popped everything off. And then I just happened to have 3 prints ready to release at Mondo in March of 2020. There was supposed to be a live in-person show. And the Skybound thing, the Mondo prints coming out, like my name got out there in a big way. And my brain is always like, you better fucking do something with this attention because it's going to be gone soon. And that's when we decided to do streams where I would drop prints, or I would design something on the first stream, finish it on the second stream, release it on the third stream while I introduced the next product. And that like format, people loved it. I mean, during the pandemic, and because everybody was tuning in and it was engaging and it was like, you know, and that kind of started making me realize that I am not going to have the opportunity to be the comic artist at the table. Like that's just not for me, in the cards for me. I'm going to have to be this guy that does this kind of shit, and that's what's going to work.
I feel the same way. Yeah, I feel the same exact way.
Yeah.
And so then how did that lead to you're a creative director at Mondo now?
Yeah. So then I was at Skybound for 3 years. Great. You know, we did the main reason I wanted to be there is because they wanted to invest in Takaro, my original kaiju.
Yes.
And I had told them I had all these plans for a world and a story and all this shit, which at the time was 2019. I had nothing. I just told them I did. But when we started working together, I was like, great, now I can do it. And so I started developing the world live on stream with people, like with user feedback, like what should we put in this and all that kind of stuff. And it started just picking up from there. And eventually, like 2.5 years in, we launched a Kickstarter for the book. And a figure and a plush and all that kind of stuff. It was really cool. We did like over 125K on an unknown IP. And awesome, yeah, they helped a lot with that. With the Kickstarter, it's a lot of work to do a Kickstarter, it turns out. And at the end of it, I decided that I think it would be better if Takaro lives at Skybound, but that me as an artist is not tethered to a company. But it was great. It was great. At the time, I was like, everybody should get hired in a company and be an artist at a company. And I still think it can work for some people like who are faster. But for me, it started to feel like I don't think I can crank out product at this clip. Instead, I'd rather just let this IP live here. We'll work together in that respect. And then I'm going to start a career behind the scenes because I don't think that I was going to be interested over time in just, like I told you before, like just doing the same thing over and over again. So I started to feel like what I was missing is the connectedness to other people, other artists. And I like connecting things. Like that's the thing that I like to do. I like saying, you should meet so-and-so. They're over here and they do this. And, oh, you got to talk to this guy. And, you know, I was just in Pasadena and I was introducing John Wayshak to Juan Gedeon, 2 of my friends, and they got along great. And that makes me feel really good. I don't know what'll come of that. Maybe nothing, but they'll be friends. And that's cool. So I like, when the opportunity to work at Mondo came up, my friend Hector was saying, dude, you could be a creative director here if you wanted to be. Like, you have the chops. Like, we respect your work and all that. And so I got hired. And then I was supposed to be managing a roster of in-house artists. That was the plan at the time. I was going to like bring in other artists on salary to be in-house and manage that. And then suddenly, like the stock price collapsed, all the layoffs happened, and then I got thrusted into this position to be one of the main people at the company. And honestly, I tell people all the time, I get paid the same, and my job is way harder now. It's not what I want.
Of course,
Before this, I was sitting pretty. I was hanging out, talking to Rob Jones, and like coming up with ideas for cool things. And like Hector and I would talk about toys, but I was just like art guy. And it was great. And now I'm like managing line plans for the next year, like, you know, traveling to conventions, representing the brand on YouTube. And I love it. Don't get me wrong. But it was very serendipitous that I had the qualifications to do that, apparently. And they decided to keep me for that reason. It was tough because, you know, I felt like I was in somebody else's house, you know, doing things. But at the same time, I don't have I don't have it like that where I can just quit a job on on an emotional whim.
Absolutely.
Can't do it.
Absolutely.
Can't do it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're at the hour mark. Mattteo, did you have anything you wanted to ask before we close it off here?
No. I think we covered everything.
Yeah. Peter, that was really a great episode.
Yeah, it was
I
fucking
can't
amazing,
thank you
man.
enough.
Oh, good.
Fucking
Good.
amazing.
Great.
Good.
Thank you for coming on.
Anytime, man.
Thank you, brother.
And are you going to be at New York Comic Con by any chance?
I'm gonna be at New York Comic Con. That's what it looks like right now.
Let's get
do
a
something
drink.
there.
Let's get some
organize.
food.
Yeah. Let's just
We'll get
reorganize
Peter.
tables at New York. We'll just go around to artist booths and turn our tables.
All right. Cool. All right. Well, thanks,
sure,
Peter. Mattteo, you want to sign us out of here?
Yes.
Inkpulp Podcast.
Hey, Eric. What's up?
Hey, Shawn, I was just looking for Mattteo online like I do every morning for my daily dose of inspiration. And all of a sudden, I stumbled upon his new website.
Mattteo has a website? That's amazing. Let me see.
Isn't it great? It has everything you need to know about Mattteo. You can buy his books, check his newest Instagram posts. You can even watch the latest episode of our podcast on it.
Wow. Mattteo is amazing. This is so great. But wait a second. What is this?
This is the best part. By subscribing to the Dumb Shark newsletter, not only will you receive promo codes for original art on Essential Sequential and information about new releases, but you'll also have access to a digital version of Behind the Fins, which is Matteo's unpublished new sketchbook that collects all of his best cover layouts.
Wow. Mattteo is so generous. This is an awesome gift. I want it too. Let me subscribe right now.
Yeah, Mattteo really knocked it out of the park with this one. Right when you think he's hit his peak, he somehow finds a way to outdo himself. I'm so impressed.
Hey, guys. I'm a little worried. Looks like someone keeps looking for naked pictures of me online. Wait a second. Eric, is that you?
Nope,